Now, there are some weaknesses with this generation. One of them is short-termism. 12 months for this generation is an awfully long time. When asked what are their highest aspirations in life, 74%, my highest aspiration in life is to get a higher pay packet. 61% said flexible work schedules. 56% said promotion in a year. These are not great lifelong aspirations. 94% said completing their education would be their very top expectation in life. That's driven by a couple of things. First one is instant gratification technology. The PlayStation 3 came out in 2006. It was already twice as powerful as PlayStation 2, which was already more powerful than a supercomputer in 1997, all for the price of $60. Singularity refers to the time when machines reach sophistication where humans can no longer understand or predict their true capabilities. And I was saying to some leaders yesterday that for people like me, even though I'm not a technophobe, I'm a bit of an early adopter, on some issues like the iPad, I can't figure out how they do it. Singularity's already happened for me. I can't figure out how Jonathan Ive and Steve Jobs built all that into this particular machine. I just can't get my head around it. Technology is moving so quickly. Avatarism. You play it with an Xbox now, a little three-dimensional, figure that represents you, a computer interface. But now people are talking about using that to have meetings. You one day will have a meeting with your bank manager through your avatar. Not your green monster from another planet. Not that kind of avatar. You'll be too busy to have a meeting with your bank manager. So your avatar will meet with his or her avatar and you'll have a meeting together. And then physically we'll come together to sign the contract. This is not science fiction, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to happen in the next 10 years. It's happening now. If you don't believe me, go to Google, type in the words Milo Project. Not Milo, it's marvelous, what a difference. But a different Milo, M-I-L-O. Milo Project. It will show you what is now actually 2 years old in terms of avatar technology. But it'll show you how far ahead it's gone. The other thing that drives short-termism is the expectation gap. And that, frustration is when your expectation exceeds your experience. And for millennials, this is a real fact of life. They live with this. This idea that I'm coming out of school, I'm going out into the big wide world, I've been led all my life to believe I'm going to do something great. My parents have nurtured me and protected me. And they've given me a great education. I'm much more protected than Generation X ever was. I'm overprotected. I've been promised the world. I've been told I'll be a credit to any employer. And here I am. I can't get a job. I've got all these qualifications and I'm standing in line to flip burgers at McDonald's. Not that that's a bad thing. You can actually get a degree in Europe now for flipping burgers in McDonald's. But again, the housing affordability study I mentioned before. Look at that list. Vancouver's at the top with an unaffordability of 9.3. Sydney's close behind. But look at Queensland's representation. Mandurah has a higher unaffordability rate than New York City. Now, maybe you're from Mandurah and you're very proud of that. But I've got to tell you, it won't shock you to know there are lots of people in the world that, if given the choice, would probably rather live in New York City than Mandurah or Bundaberg, that has a similar rating of unaffordability. This affects millennials more than it affects you or I. They live with this frustration between what they're expecting and what they're experiencing, especially in the last 5 years. They're a hyper-nurtured generation. And every employer who's tried to work with millennials probably knows this already. Because employers say, they're quite spoiled. They're a bit brittle. That's what employers say in surveys. They're a bit brittle. You can't be totally honest with them. You have to sort of pad it a little bit because their parents have been like that. Their parents are liberal people and nice people, and they protect their kids to a point that they may be a bit overprotected. There's more cameras watching our kids than any other time in history. In Britain, it's 1 camera for every 14 people in the urban centres. Largely in the interests of watching over children. Some employers will say it's a self-occupied generation. It's hard to get them involved in the team because they're a bit preoccupied with themselves and their friends and what their friends are doing today. This is an interesting one. They're a bit disregarding of authority figures while expecting a lot from authority figures because that's the way their parents were. The parents sort of nice, operated in the background, gave them all they needed and then got out of the way. So they expect the same from an employer, which of course is not the way the real world works. And at times in the surveys, employers have found them a little bit unwilling to commit. They want to maximize their opportunities and run. You know, they soak up funds in recruitment. You've spent a lot of money to get them and train them, and then they're out of here. There's a digital disconnect happening with some of this generation. It comes back to the high touch thing I said before. Digital identity is now a term psychologists use in reference to this generation, 90% of whom say that they spend time on social networking sites every day, 40% for the rest of the population. 25% say, in their own words, they are, quote, addicted to their mobile phone and suffer separation anxiety when it is switched off or misplaced. This is leading to what we now call digital isolation, similar to urban isolation. It has similar effects. It leads to what the psychologists call absent presence. You're there, but you're not really there. The more connected we become, in some cases, the more isolated we become, because in Britain today, according to a survey 2 weeks ago, and again I commented in the media on this, every Briton has on average 3 good friends, according to them, 3 trusted friends, whilst they have 130 Facebook friends, which I think you know is a very different animal. And so in the age of high tech, millennials want high touch. That's where we get flash mobbing from. Kids texting one another, young adults coming together in huge numbers at railway stations and houses of parliament and other places to either have fun or demonstrate and make a point. It's the high touch. It's the social activity in the midst of digital isolation. You need the talent of this generation. You need their contacts. Nobody talks virally like this. Nobody knows marketing intuitively like this generation. The diversity of generations is actually good for your business because it brings a tension that can be turned into creativity. And if you don't grab them and train them and win their loyalty, you can bet your life your competitors will. How do you enlist this generation? First of all, play into that collaborative spirit. Building alliances is a powerful way of showing that your enterprise is attractive to a millennial generation. Alliances, of course, are built on 2 things: shared goals, pragmatic goal, symbiotic benefit. Each party must feel they get a benefit. This is very attractive to millennials, but you have to add one more for them, and that is altruistic purpose. They want to see an alliance that is built for something more than bottom line profits. Come back to work that matters. Closing what Dr. Malcolm Johnson here calls the alignment gap, and I like that. That idea that, people are not aligned between their personal aspirations and the aspirations of the work, of the company, of the business. We've got to close that gap. It's a practical thing for you when it comes to building alliances. There are groups like Rockcore now that ask young people to donate time in order to win tickets, to earn tickets for major concerts. And companies now are buying into this idea that volunteering is cool. That's the slogan of Rockcore. And so Orange in Britain recently did a big concert at the Royal Albert Hall, aligned with Rockcore, so kids had to give up time in order to earn a ticket to get into the gig. 5,000 young people gave 20,000 hours to 41 charities across London. Very, very powerful thing for a corporate group to be doing, and really speaks to millennial generation. There's the One Difference campaign that uses the selling of water to pay for components of water pumps in Africa. And BT is heavily now aligned with the One Difference campaign. And it's the area where they put most of that 20,000 workdays I mentioned earlier for charity. Your company can do something similar. You can find some sort of enterprise like this that gets millennials off their backsides and doing something. They actually enjoy that challenge. They're looking for that altruistic challenge. It has benefits, all this, for your company, because the third sector can teach your company new skills. It builds team morale, because altruism carries its own reward. Martin Luther King said a human being hasn't begun to live until they can look beyond their own concerns and see the concerns of the broader humanity. Build a trust structure into your company. That's very attractive to millennials. Flexible work practices are so important to them because it demonstrates trust. See, the very technology that has made flexibility possible is also being used now to challenge the whole idea of privacy. In fact, in some ways, what we used to call privacy no longer exists. But if you rob people enough of their privacy, you rob them of their motivation. And so if there are 1 in 14 cameras in the streets of the UK, by the way, only 3% of crime in the UK is solved using CCTV cameras. So you can't argue the case from security. If society doesn't trust the people, it's not long before the people reciprocate. And trust breaks down in reverse. And that's where you have social unrest. The same can happen in a company. So many employers now, 75% in America, companies regularly monitor emails of their employees. 30% track keystrokes. They use deep packet encryption, the thing the government uses in America to track words in emails that suggest terrorist activity. Some companies now use that within the corporate structure to track what their employees are saying and spot key words that concern them. Listen, that's not going to help you when it comes to millennials. They are built for trust. They want to be trusted. They aspire to be trusted. Firm accountability structures. They need structure. Remember that. This is a generation that needs structure because it's had it from the time it was born. Every hour of the day has been allocated to learning this and then doing this and going to this football match and, then going off to the club. Structure's important. Some millennials have very big trouble now actually looking after their own free time as adults because they've never had unstructured time in their lives before. So structure's important. But when you give them structure, you've got to make sure your facts are straight. They have no tolerance for ignorance. You've got to make sure that you avoid credibility gaps. If you've got a line manager who is less well educated than the millennials they lead, make sure the line manager knows how to show expertise in other ways to avoid credibility gaps. And give them constant feedback. I didn't say constant affirmation. I don't mean stroking of the ego. I mean constant, fair, well thought out feedback. This is a generation that thrives. It hates micromanagement. It doesn't like you looking over their shoulders. But it loves you to give them feedback of one form or another. Do you know studies have shown if you put your millennials in one place in the workspace and let them work in that space, they'll do better than if they're separated. Why is that? Because they love feedback. They feed off the buzz of one another. If you have children as I do in their early 20s, you know what I'm talking about. They love feedback from their peers as well as their overseers. By the way, in brainstorming sessions, this is not a generation that's going to be quiet and polite. They were taught from the time they were small to speak up. We want to hear what you have to say. We value your input. So don't be offended by that. Mentoring is important. Don't want to spend time on that today because there are others that have no doubt spoken to each of you about that. But reverse mentoring is also important. Procter & Gamble are doing this. Microsoft's doing this. Having sessions and structured periods where millennials are mentoring older workers. Because there are things millennials know better, like digital technology, like viral communication, social networking, and the like. And get a digital mindset happening in your enterprise. You want to attract millennials? It's not just about the gadgets, it's the way they think. They think digital. Marshall McLuhan was right in the 60s when he said in the age of TV, the medium has become the message. The medium you use to communicate says as much about your ideas as the words you choose. So it is important to have the right technology happening for you. But it's not just about the tools. Technology is now the new rock and roll. People don't line up for an album anymore. They line up for an iPad. They sleep out all night for days in London to get one piece of kit. It's the new it's the new rock and roll. It's the new way to make social change happen. Technology. They think digitally, which means that they think with a new vocabulary. Have you noticed how bad they are at spelling? One of the top things employers say to me is, Mel, they're so bad at spelling. Their syntax is all right up the creek. Their grammar's terrible. Well, that's text. 74% of text messages are written by this generation all over the world. This is a generation that really has learned its syntax from digital equipment. And so its vocabulary is different. Many companies in the midst of that have a last century vocabulary and wonder why millennials don't get it. When Electrolux went to America for the first time some decades ago, it wanted to find a marketing campaign to help it. It's a Swedish company. To help it break into the American market. Now, they didn't have any American people in the marketing department in Sweden. They had some English speakers, but not Americans. So they came up with this slogan they thought would be a real winner with the Americans. If it sucks, it must be Electrolux. That'll really work, won't it? They had to change it. It's not what your words do to the audience. It's what the audience does to your words that counts. It's what they're hearing that counts. And millennials do speak a different language. They think digitally, which means certain things. It means huge data doesn't mean huge space. They're not impressed by how much you know, because huge data can fit in an RFID grain of sand. It's not about how much you know, it's about how much you can innovate with what you know. That's what they respect. For them, screens are authority windows. Everything comes through a screen. If I'm standing here today and there's millennials here and my picture's on the screen, they're listening to the screen, not to me. And if I meet them afterwards, it's not quite as good as if they met the guy off the screen. Because for them, everything happens from a screen. Everything of authority comes through a screen. And for them, sharing information multiplies information. This is digital thinking. For us, our analog way of thinking says if you share it, you lose it. For them, it's if you share it, you multiply it. So they are looking to work for companies that don't have rigid lines between what we share and what we don't. Obviously, there's proprietary information that is private, but there's also a sharing that goes on beyond that. If you want to attract millennials, obviously go green, because 18 to 25-year-olds, 90% of them want a green office. 70% want to have recycling bins, 47% water-saving devices, 52% standby devices on all electrical equipment, 71% to share printers in the office, 47% want solar panels on the site. How many of you have got that already? Well done. That's very attractive to millennials. Why? Because they will carry the load for an environmental disaster. If there's environmental disaster, it's their generation that's going to have to deal with it. We touched on this one before, encouraging eyeball time. I like teaching millennials how to data fast. I use Twitter a lot. You need to go on our Twitter site. It's all about leadership and social change. It's great. Just Mal Fletcher. Go look it up on Twitter. But I like to teach millennials there's a time to turn it all off. Have a data fasting period for a day. It's amazing how it'll get your sanity back on track for a little while. Training and recruitment. You know what? Get the millennials involved in recruiting millennials, because nobody does it better. Let them drive the social networking campaign that you use to recruit others. My daughter works for a radio station in the UK, and her job is social networking. She's 26, and she's the one driving the whole company's social networking enterprise, because she understands it. She understands it better than I do. She understands it better than her employer. Give them training. Spend that time, again, in training. Don't back off training this generation just because they don't seem to want it. They do want it. They don't always know how to express it. Train them in things they don't know, like divergent thinking, because they're really good at convergence, getting to the answer quickly. Teach them more about that divergence we spoke about. Reflective thinking, taking time. If you're constantly doing this, it's hard to be reflective. The psychologists call it constant partial attention. You're flitting from one screen to another, one device to another. You can't focus for long enough, and employers tell me this. I can't get them to carry an argument through from beginning to end. They lose it halfway through. We can help them with that. We can teach them how to think reflectively in order to build argument, to build story. Strategic thinking is important. Long term is important. And cross-generational appreciation. We're nearly finished. Here's the to-do list to finish with. Understand attention points between the generations. They're not a bad thing. They can actually work for you if you're a little bit creative. I love having Gen Xers around me. All of the people who work in media for me are Gen Xers. And I love them dearly because they're so pragmatic and they're so different to me. They're quite cynical about anyone who claims to be an expert and hasn't proven it. And then I love having millennials around for other reasons, because they are so civic-minded and they do believe they can change the world more than boomers ever did. Move over, grandpa, it's our turn, right? Learn digital think. Stop thinking analog. You know what the key thing to digital thinking is? 1 and 0, on and off. Millennials are either 100% on or they're 100% off a lot of the time. You'll find that when you try to enlist them in a volunteer program sometimes, they'll be 100% with you or 100% not. At least you know where you stand. Build collaboratively inside the enterprise, outside. Give feedback with accountability. We spoke about that. Expect tension, but that can be a creative thing. Don't take offense if a millennial argues with you nicely in public. If it's not nicely, talk to them about it. But if they argue in the team meeting with you, it's not that they don't respect you. It's just that they've been taught to speak up. We want to hear what you have to say. Help them channel that. And vive la différence. Long live the difference. Make the most of it. All right, I hope that's helpful to you. It's been great to speak to you today. Thank you for having this London person, once from Australia, allowing me to share with you. Thank you, Wayne.